Chapter 11 of the Bird Study Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bird Study Book by T. Gilbert Pearson. Chapter 11. Making Bird Sanctuaries. The best place to study wild birds is on a reservation, for there birds have greatly lost their fear of man, and primitive conditions have been largely restored. In one of the southern sea-bird colonies I have photographed royal terns standing unafraid on the sands not 12 feet distant. They had become so accustomed to the warden in charge that they had regained their confidence in man. At Lake Worth I saw a gentleman feed scaup ducks that swam to within 2 yards of his boat. In thousands of dooryards throughout the country, wild birds, won by kind treatment, now take their food or drink within a few feet of their human protectors. The dooryards have become little bird reservations. I have several friends who regularly feed chickadees in winter, perched on their outstretched hands. It is astonishing how quickly wild creatures respond to a reasonable treatment. This may readily be learned by any householder who will try the experiment. With a little patience, any teacher can instruct her pupils in the simple art of making the birds feel at home in the vicinity of the schoolhouse. Natural nesting places destroyed. Some kinds of birds, as far back as we know their history, have built their nests in the holes of trees. Woodpeckers have strong, chisel-shaped bills and are able to excavate nesting cavities, but there are others that do not possess such tools. These must depend on finding the abandoned hole of some woodpecker or the natural hollow of some tree. It not infrequently happens that such birds are obliged to search far and wide for a hole in which they can make their abode. It is customary for those who take care of lawns in city parks to chop away and remove all dead limbs or dead trees. As very few woodpeckers ever attempt to dig a nesting hole in a living tree, such work of the axeman means that when the season comes for the rearing of young, all mated woodpeckers must move on to where more natural conditions await them. This results in an abnormal reduction of the number of holes for the use of the weaker-billed hole-nesting species, and they must seek the few available hollows or knot-holes. Even these places are often taken away from them, for along comes the tree doctor who, in his purpose of aiding to preserve the trees, fills up the natural openings with cement, and the birds are literally left out in the cold. It is plainly to be seen, therefore, that one reason why more birds do not remain in our towns through the spring months is the absence of places where they can lay their eggs and rear their young. Nesting boxes for birds. To overcome this difficulty, the Audubon Society several years ago began to advocate the erection of suitable nesting boxes, and today the practice is gaining wide usage. More persons every year are putting such boxes upon poles or nailing them to trees about their homes, and some city authorities include bird boxes in the annual expenditure for the care of public parks. It was not much more than a decade ago that the first serious commercial attempt was made to place bird boxes on the market. Today there are not less than 25 firms engaged in their manufacture. Some of the boxes are very ornate and make beautiful additions even to the most carefully kept estate. One can buy them at prices varying from 35 cents to $35 each. Among the many responsible manufacturers that may be recommended are the Crescent Company, Birdville, Toms River, New Jersey; Pinedale Bird Nesting Box Company, Wareham, Massachusetts; the Audubon Birdhouse Company, Meriden, New Hampshire; Maplewood Biological Laboratory, Stamford, Connecticut; Jacobs Birdhouse Company, 404 South Washington Street, Waynesburg, Pennsylvania; Decker Brothers, Rhinebeck, New York; Winthrop Packard, Canton, Massachusetts. It is not necessary, however, to buy boxes to put up for birds. Equally useful ones can be made in the manual training department of any school or in the basement or woodshed at home. If you do not know how to begin, you should buy one bird box and construct others similar for yourself. Men sometimes make the mistake of thinking it is absolutely necessary that such boxes should conform strictly to certain set dimensions. Remember that the cavities in trees and stumps which birds naturally use show a wide variety in size, shape, and location. A many-roomed, well-painted martin house makes a pleasing appearance in the landscape, but may not be attractive to the martins. As a boy I built up a colony of more than 15 pairs of these birds by the simple device of rudely partitioning a couple of soap boxes. The entrances to the different rooms were neither uniform in size nor in shape, but were such as an untrained boy could cut out with a hatchet. A dozen gourds, each with a large hole in the side, completed the tenements for this well-contented martin community. Some rules for making and erecting bird boxes. Here are a few simple rules on the making and placing of bird boxes. 1. In all nest boxes, except those designed for martins, the opening should be several inches above the floor, thus conforming to the general plan of a woodpecker's hole, or natural cavity in a tree. 2. As a rule, nest boxes should be erected on poles from 10 to 30 feet from the ground, or fastened to the sides of trees where limbs do not interfere with the outlook. The main exception is in the case of wrens, whose boxes or gourds can be nailed or wired in fruit trees or to the side of buildings. 3. Martin houses should be erected on poles at least 20 feet high, placed well out in the open, not less than 100 feet from buildings or large trees. 4. All boxes should be taken down after the nesting season and the old nesting material removed. It should be remembered that hole nesting birds are the only kind that will ever use a bird box. One need not expect a meadowlark to leave its nest in the grass for a box on a pole, nor imagine that an oriole will give up the practice of weaving its swinging cradle on an elm limb to go into a box nailed to the side of a tree. Feeding birds. Much can be done to bring birds about the home or the schoolhouse by placing food where they can readily get it. The majority of land birds that pass the winter in Canada or in the colder parts of the United States feed mainly upon seeds. Cracked corn, wheat, rice, sunflower seed, hemp seed, and bird seed, purchased readily in any town, are therefore exceedingly attractive articles of diet. Breadcrumbs are enjoyed by many species. Food should not be thrown out on the snow unless there is a crust on it or the snow has been well trampled down. Usually it should be placed on boards. Various feeding plans have been devised to prevent the food from being covered or washed away by snow or rain. Detailed explanations of these can be found in Bulletin No. 1, Attracting Birds About the Home, issued by the National Association of Audubon Societies. Suet wired to the limb of a tree on the lawn will give comfort and nourishment to many a chickadee, nuthatch, and downy woodpecker. To make a bird sanctuary, nesting sites and food are the first requirements. There appears to be no reason why town and city parks should not be made into places of great attraction for the wild birds. Community sanctuaries. At Meriden, New Hampshire, there is a tract of land containing 32 acres of fields and woods, dedicated to the comfort and happiness of wild birds. It is owned by the Meriden Bird Club, and owes its existence largely to the intelligence and enthusiasm of Ernest H. Baines, bird lover and lecturer, who lives there. The entire community takes an interest in its maintenance, and there birds are fed and nesting places provided. It is in the widest sense a community sanctuary. There are now a number of these cooperative bird havens established and cared for in practically the same way. One is in Cincinnati, another in Ithaca, New York, and still another at Greenwich, Connecticut. Birdcraft Sanctuary. The best equipped of this class of community bird refuges, as distinguished from private estates or Audubon Society, state or federal bird reservations, is Birdcraft Sanctuary in Fairfield, Connecticut, a tract of 10 acres presented to the Connecticut Audubon Society in June, 1914. Mrs. Mabel Osgood Wright, president of the Connecticut Society, has written that in the creation of this sanctuary it was decided that certain requirements were necessary. A cat-proof fence to surround the entire place. That it may not look aggressive, it should be set well inside the picturesque old wall. Stone gate posts and a rustic gate at the entrance on the highway. A bungalow for the caretaker, wherein there shall be a room for the meetings of the Society's Executive Committee and Board. A tool and workshop of corresponding style. Several rustic shelters and many seats. The assembling of the various springs into a pond, so designed as to make an island of a place where the redwings nest. Trails to be cut through the brush, and the turf grass in a charming bit of old orchard on the hilltop to be restored for the benefit of worm-pulling robins. Several stone basins to be constructed for bird baths, houses to be put up of all sorts, from wren boxes, von Berlepsch model, flicker and owl boxes to a martin hotel, and lastly, the supplementing of the natural growth by planting pines, spruces, and hemlocks for windbreaks, and mountain ashes, mulberries, sweet cherries, flowering shrubs, and vines for berries and hummingbird honey. Not only were all these things done, but there has been built and equipped a small museum of natural history, unique in its good taste and usefulness. Cemeteries as Bird Sanctuaries. The interest in the subject of bird sanctuaries is growing every day. In fact, all America is now planning new homes for her birds, homes where they may live with unrestricted freedom, where food and lodging in abundance and of the best will be supplied, where bathing pools will be at their service, where blossoming trees will welcome them in the spring and fields of grain in the fall, quiet places where these privileges will bring to the birds much joy and contentment. Throughout this country there should be a concerted effort to convert the cemeteries, the homes of our friends who have gone away, into sanctuaries for the bird life of this land. And what isolated spots could be more welcome to the birds than these places that hold so many sad memories for human beings? No place in the world ought to speak more forcibly to us of the resurrection than the cemeteries of our land. In them we should hear inspiring bird songs, notice the nesting of birds, and the little ones preparing for their flight into the world. There we should find beautiful flowers and waving grain, typical of that spiritual harvest which should be associated in our minds with comfort and peace. A birdless cemetery. I visited not long ago one of the old-time cemeteries, the pride of a neighboring city. It was indeed a place of beauty to the eye, but to my mind there is always something flat and insipid about a landscape lacking the music of singing birds. Therefore I looked and listened for my feathered friends. Some English sparrows flew up from the drive, and I heard the rusty, hinge-like notes of a small company of purple crackles that were nesting, I suspected, in the pine trees down the slope, but of really cheerful bird life there appeared to be none in this artificially beautified 40-acre enclosure. There is no reason to suppose that, under normal conditions, birds would shun a cemetery any more than does the traditional graveyard rabbit. It was not the dread of the dead, such as some mortals have, that kept the songbirds from this place. It was the work of the living that had driven them away. From one boundary to another there was scarcely a yard of underbrush where a thrasher or chewink might lurk, or in which a redstart or a dainty chestnut-sided warbler might place its nest. Not a drop of water was discoverable where a bird might slake its thirst. Neither in limb nor bole was there a single cavity where a titmouse, wren, or bluebird might construct a bed for its young. No fruit-bearing trees were there to invite the birds in summer, nor, so far as I could see, any berry-bearing shrubs such as birds enjoy, or any weed patches to attract the flocks of whitethroats and juncos that come drifting southward with the falling leaves of autumn. Had my visit to this place been made late in April or in May, there might have been a different tale to tell. September might also have yielded more birds than June, for September is a season when the migrants are with us for a time. Then the little voyagers of the upper air are wont to pause after a night of tiresome flight, and rest for the day in any grove that chances to possess even moderate home comforts. Birds of a New York Graveyard. Some time ago B.S. Bowdish made a careful study of the bird life of St. Paul's Churchyard in New York City. This property is 330 feet long and 177 feet wide. In it is a large church and also a church school. Along one side surge the Broadway throngs. From the opposite side come the roar and rumble of an elevated railway. The area contains, according to Mr. Bowdish, 3 large, 10 medium, and 40 small trees. With great frequency for 2 years, field glass in hand, he pursued his work of making a bird census of the graveyard. No bird's nest rewarded his search, for the place was absolutely destitute of feathered songsters during the late spring and summer, and, with a single exception, he never found a bird there in winter. Yet it is interesting to note that in this noisy, limited area, during the periods of migration, he discovered 328 birds, embracing 40 species. Why do not more of the birds that pass in spring tarry in this quiet place for the summer? The answer is that the cemetery has been rendered unattractive to them by the merely human committee in charge of the property. During the season when birds are engaged with their domestic duties, they are usually a very wise little people. They know perfectly well whether a region is calculated to provide them with sure and safe nesting sites, and whether sufficient food and water are available for their daily wants. A little of this same wisdom on our part, and a comparatively small expenditure, might make a bird paradise of almost any cemetery. Such places are not usually frequented by men and boys who go afield for the purpose of shooting. That is an important point in the establishment of a bird sanctuary. Eliminate enemies. One great enemy of the birds, however, must be guarded against, the domestic cat. This can be done fairly effectively by means of a cat-proof fence. Gunners and cats having been eliminated, few other enemies of birds need be seriously considered. Bird-catching hawks are not often numerous in the neighborhood of cemeteries. Red squirrels are accused of pilfering from birds' nests, and when abundant they may constitute a menace. Properly constructed bird boxes, wisely placed, have often proved a means of increasing bird life to an astonishing degree, and they are absolutely the only inducement to whole nesting varieties to remain during the summer in a cemetery from which all standing dead wood has been removed. Even the strong-billed woodpecker will not abide in a region where the only trees are living ones, unless, perchance, an artificial nest entices the resplendent and dashing flicker to tarry. Many a bluebird, with its azure coat gleaming in the sunlight, visits the cemetery in early spring. From perch to perch he flies, and in his plaintive note can be detected the question that every bird asks of his mate, "Where shall we find a place for our nest?" In the end he flies away. Therefore, when the roses and lilies bloom, the visitor is deprived of the bluebird's cheery song, for the little fellow and his mate have departed to the neighboring farm, where they may be found, perhaps, in the old apple orchard. A few cents expended for lumber, and a very little labor in the making of a small box to be attached to the side of a tree, or erected on a post, are all that is needed to keep the bluebirds where they can cheer the hearts of sorrowing visitors. The tiny wrens, whose loud bursts of song are entirely out of proportion to their size, can be attracted in summer to the proportion of 2 pairs or more to every acre. It is a curious fact, of which I believe but little has been written, that birds that build open nests may often be induced to remain in a locality if attractive nesting material is placed within easy reach. In many a cemetery orioles could be tempted to weave cradles among the swaying elm limbs if strings and fragments of brightly colored yarns were placed where the birds could find them. Baron von Berlepsch, whose experiments in attracting birds to his place in Germany have been widely advertised, found that when the tops of bushes were drawn in closely by means of a wire or cord, the resulting thick mass of leaves and twigs offered so fine a place for concealing nests that few birds could resist the temptation to use them. Other means of rendering a cemetery alluring to nesting birds will readily present themselves when an active interest is developed in the subject. A little thought, a little care, and a little trouble would make it possible for many birds to dwell in a cemetery, and it must be remembered that unless they can nest there, the chances are that no great volume of bird music will fill the air. The young of most song birds are fed to a great extent on the soft larvae of insects, of which there is usually an abundant supply everywhere. Many mother birds, however, like to vary this animal diet with a little fruit juice, and the ripened pulp of the blackberry, strawberry, or mulberry will cheer the spirits of their nestlings. Such fruits in most places are easily grown, and they make a pleasant addition to the bird's menu. In a well-watered territory birds are often more numerous than in a dry region. You may find 100 of them along the stream in the valley to 1 on the mountain top. A cemetery undecorated with fountains, and through or near which no stream flows, is too dry a place for the average bird to risk the exigencies of rearing a family. A few simply constructed fountains or drinking pools will work wonders in the way of attracting birds to a waterless territory. In many graveyards considerable unoccupied space might well be planted in buckwheat or some other small grain. If this is left uncut, the quantity of nourishing food thus produced will bring together many kinds of grain-eating birds. Berries and fruits for birds. Many native shrubs and bushes grow berries that birds will come far to gather. Look over the following list which Frederick H. Kennard of Massachusetts has recommended, and see if you do not think many of them would be decorative additions to the cemetery. Surely some of them are equal in beauty to many of the shrubs usually planted, and they have the added value of furnishing birds with wholesome food. Here is a part of Mr. Kennard's list: shadbush, gray, silky, and red osier, cornel, dangleberry, huckleberry, inkberry, black alder, bayberry, shining smooth and staghorn sumacs, large flowering currant, thimbleberry, blackberry, elder, snowberry, dwarf bilberry, blueberry, black haw, hobblebush, and arrowwood. In the way of fruit-bearing shade trees he recommends sugar maple, flowering dogwood, white and cockspur thorn, native red mulberry, tupelo, black cherry, choke cherry, and mountain ash. For the same purpose he especially recommends the planting of the following vines: Virginia creeper, bull beaver, frost grape, and fox grape. Such shrubs and vines are usually well stripped of their berries after the first heavy snowfall. That is the time to begin feeding the birds in earnest. The more food wisely placed where the birds can get it, the more birds you will surely have in the winter. Seeds and grain, with a judicious mixture of animal fat, form the best possible ration for the little feathered pilgrims. Rye, wheat, sunflower seeds, and cracked corn, mixed together in equal parts, and accompanied by a liberal sprinkling of ground suet and beef scrap, make an excellent food for birds at this season. This should be placed on shelves attached to trees or buildings, or on oilcloth spread on the snow, or on the ground where the snow has been scraped away. On one occasion the writer attracted many birds by the simple method of providing them with finely pounded fresh beef bones. Furnishing birds with food in winter might well be a pleasant and profitable duty of the children who attend Sunday school in rural churches that have graveyards near. Why should we not make a bird sanctuary of every city park and cemetery in America? Why leave these places to the sparrows, the grackles, and perhaps the starlings, when bluebirds and thrushes are within hail, eager to come if the hand of invitation be extended? End of Chapter 11.